Hi, hi everyone. I hope we are trying to be as interesting as possible so that everyone don't fall asleep right after lunch. So I'm Kay. I'm actually based in KL, but I'm here for Innovfest. So this panel we are going to be talking about deep tech. So deep tech is a very hot topic nowadays. It's said to be revolutionary. It also requires incredible expertise and capital, and so we are going to be talking about how to make a smart investment in deep tech in Southeast Asia, Asia, and across the world. So um, I'll invite my panelists to have a short introduction of themselves. Let's start with Hsien-Hui.
Okay, hi guys. My name is Hsien-Hui. Introduced, I think, at the point when they were talking about venture investing, they made it more silent. Not quite sure why. But I'm head of venture investing for SGInnovate. For those of you who know SGInnovate, I don't need to introduce us further, but those who are not familiar with SGInnovate, we are basically an early stage deep tech investor, wholly funded by the Singapore government. And we run two funds. One fund is a co-investment fund with a sole focus on Singapore startups. And the second fund is a global fund that looks at technologies and startups that might be complementary to the technologies being developed in Singapore. Our areas of focus, obviously deep tech is very wide, so we need to narrow the focus a little bit. We focus on AI, autonomous vehicles, medical technology, quantum technology, and bits of IoT and cybersecurity. Thanks.
Hi everyone, my name is Ling Cheah. I'm operating partner at Wavemaker, which is an early stage venture capital fund focused on B2B and deep tech. We currently have about 108 investments in our portfolio, primarily invest in Southeast Asia, and our proud partner of SGInnovate.
Hi everyone, my name is Charlz. I work with Vickers Venture Partners. We're a Singapore headquartered venture firm. We're very much a global firm. We have 8 offices around the world, so we're everywhere from Silicon Valley, New York, and China. We're in Singapore, obviously. And we invest across the board, Series A and B onwards, primarily into advanced technologies. And that's a theme we've been, I guess, evolving more and more so in our more recent funds. Currently raising our 6th fund, and looking forward to some discussion with the rest of the panelists.
Hi, my name is Saemin. I run a corporate venture capital firm called Rakuten Ventures. We've been around about 6 years, running 7. The fund size is about $300 million. We invest in everything from deep tech, hard tech, to whatever makes a lot of pragmatic business sense.
So let's start with our first question. I have come across conversations with several investors and also startups that has mentioned, deep tech is actually one of the most underrated sector in Asia. Do you agree with this statement? What are your thoughts on that? Maybe Saemin, you want to start?
I think it's underrated in specific regions. I mean, obviously, if you look at China as Asia, it's never underrated in terms of how important deep tech, artificial intelligence, a lot of the automation stuff that are going on is rated, and how voraciously like a WeChat or a Baidu group would go after those headcounts. But definitely, I do see in markets like Korea, even in Japan, people who have deep tech knowledge but doesn't have the short bridge to apply that to a commercial application, they do get somewhat passed over. And I think definitely, but the market is turning around to see how can you actually build these people into productive kind of units to run businesses.
Charlz?
I think I'd agree with many points there. I think underrated may not be the right word, because our job as investors is to find the best investment opportunities. And thus, if everyone just rushes into deep tech because they feel it's underrated, I don't think it's the right approach. So in places like Singapore, Singapore's been doing an incredible job, and there are amazing opportunities here. However, we must also consider the opportunity cost. I mean, if you look at Southeast Asia as a region, in the last few years alone, we've had 90 million new internet users come on board. So in the general tech space, still there's incredible opportunities. So I wouldn't say underrated. I think that people are well aware of the opportunities in places like Singapore, but it's growing.
Yeah, I would agree that it's certainly something that is getting more attention. It certainly wasn't the case when Wavemaker started our second fund 4 years ago. We currently have about 62 investments in the deep tech, what can be classified as deep tech. And in the past, it was more difficult to get LPs to come in. It was more difficult to get customers to buy the commercial product. Today, we're very happy to say that there's actually a lot more. The numbers are increasing, and you see, guys like Keppel Corp is one of our LPs, Temasek, and even further afield, the family office of Paul Allen, Vulcan, is one of our investors, and it just goes to show you that there is a lot more interest in the region now for this sort of beyond the traditional B2C type of businesses.
So Hsien-Hui, I have a question for you before you go on, because your colleague at my colleague had an interview with your colleague at SGInnovate, Steve. So the issue that was discussed is that there is a lack of funding among deep tech startups, so there is sort of like a funding gap. So people who wanted to raise funds from local or regional VCs from this part of the world are finding it hard to do so. Would you elaborate on that?
I think there is definitely a funding gap. I don't think it is restricted solely to deep tech. And perhaps I'll elaborate. I'll sort of answer the first question together with the second. Deep tech, to a certain extent, is different in different parts of the world. The evolution has taken place in a fairly disjointed manner. In Singapore, the digitization process is there. We are midway through it. AI, obviously is a big part of that, and there's value in that. In other countries, where digitization is just at the start, there's no point talking about AI or deep tech. When nothing is digitized, there's no data available. In terms of the funding, and funding is always a function of the viability, the business itself. So obviously, if there's no business, there is no funding. And the truth is also that, most of us are venture funds. We know there's a lifetime, there's a specific objective of the fund. And SGInnovate is fortunate. We are focused on deep tech, so we are fairly flexible in what we invest in. But other funds are not able to be so nimble as to switch just because the wind is blowing in the area of AI or in quantum or in some other deep tech areas. So I think, yes, there is a funding gap at the B series and above, but I think it is pretty much uniform across the region.
So I would like to understand how, as investors, how do you identify potential companies? Because I have read that, like in deep tech, there are also very niche sectors, niche verticals, like, the biotech, where you have to really, it's very capital intensive and things like that. So it's sort of become like a zero-sum game. Like, you have to put in a lot of capital in order to make it work. But what if it doesn't work, right? So how do you work around that? Charlz, would you like to go?
Sure. Well, first of all, I don't think deep tech always is a zero-sum game. And a lot of the time, these businesses have underlying technology, fundamental IP, that is of value and can be used in other areas. So that's a little bit different to a traditional, say, network effect business where you're just trying to acquire market share, where you have one winner take everything and everyone else dies. So I guess how we go about assessing deep tech companies, really, we like to look at technology itself. So when we're looking at when we're investing in this space, we want to see three things. Ideally, there's three beautiful characteristics that are very rare to find. The first one is the technology is magnitudes of order better than what currently exists. It's IP protected, so there's some strong defensibility in what they're doing. And the third piece is the market is already known. So that's incredibly rare, because if you have all those three things lined up, it's probably priced very high, and there's no need for people like us to come in involved in those businesses. So we must decide where we want to take that risk. What type of risk is best suited for us? For us, I think we are most comfortable actually taking technology risk. If you think about someone developing something and thinking about it from a market risk perspective, that's hard for us to judge. So if someone was to come to me and said, hey, I developed a new watch, it's a new iWatch and it does this and it's going to be better than the iWatch, but it's only going to be a little bit better. There's no really defensibility in that. Maybe it'll take off, maybe it won't. That's sort of hard to us to judge if the market's going to accept that. If someone comes to us with a product and we know the market, let's just say it's an energy storage solution for the EV industry. The market's very clearly well known. Everyone knows the lithium-ion batteries, the limiting technology in EVs. So very clear there. Let's just say it's some interesting material science technology involved in a separator of that battery or something like that. So there's IP around that. So then there's the technology risk. So do you think that this team can pull this off? And I would feel more comfortable taking that risk than market risk in that regard.
Saemin, you keep nodding.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. I mean, for me, when I look at deep tech, and this is more temporal in terms of context. Maybe in 2012, when I started investing in companies, the deep tech companies, I would have looked through a colored lens in that it's okay that they don't have much of a business plan or much of a P&L balance when they're going after the industry that they're ambiguously trying to go after. But honestly, in 2018-19, I have much higher expectations on what founders are trying to build. If you come up to me with a specific IP or technology and show me it's working at a production rate but not scaled, I expect that company to come back to me maybe 2 or 3 months later to have a game plan, to have a market plan, so that we can march on that road together. For me, I simply say that if you're not ready to build a business, then I'm not going to invest in your company.
Yeah, I mean, certainly the case. I mean, I can't agree more. You see, the tech doesn't sell itself. So for us, deep tech investments are like any other venture investments. You have the tech, and you need a commercialization strategy. And for that, the founder, what we like are founders who have insight into the customers. You're not just in love with your solution. So many people are in love with their solutions, but they can't articulate the problem that they're solving. If you can articulate the problem you're solving, it means you're listening to your customers, you know what they want, and then that's the only way you can. Why is your solution 10x better than what was there before? Because you're disrupting. If you want to disrupt someone, you've got to be able to articulate why you're disrupting them and why you're solving the problem in a 10x factor. So commercialization is what we look at, as opposed to we don't invest in science projects, briefly.
Because some of the technologies that SGInnovate looks at tends to be very cutting edge and maybe not even at a commercialization stage. Before I say that, I totally agree with all my fellow panelists. I think that what they have are things that we do as well at SGInnovate when we evaluate deep tech companies. But what we probably do when we look at new technologies, for instance, quantum, is to look at it from 3 distinct areas. Obviously, the technology is important. And what we try to do is not just to understand what the technology can do, because anyone with Wikipedia can help you to understand that. But we go deep into the technology itself to understand what the technology's limitations are based on today's hardware and today's technology. And then we look at what are the structural issues, what are the regulatory hurdles, what are the things that are going to stop it from growing. For instance, in AI, one of the structural issues we found was really the PDPA or policies that the government has. Restrictions on data are going to inhibit the ability of such companies to build new models, to build exciting new companies. The third one is really the cultural issue. Technology is not something you roll it out and everyone accepts it. How accepting are the customers of this new technology? Is it going to overhaul what they do? Is it going to result in certain people who are entrenched within the company losing their jobs? So we take all these factors into consideration whenever we look at a company. And so we don't just look at a company per se, we look at the overall system.
So Hsien-Hui touched upon challenges investing in AI. So for the rest of my panelists, what are the biggest challenges that you face in investing in this sector? Is it regulatory, or like Hsien-Hui say, is it customer challenge? Is it anything else?
Sure, I mean, I'll start. Yeah, I guess one of the biggest challenges I find is sorting through the noise. There's a lot of very smart people in every lab all over the world working on pretty much the same problems. And these people are all incredibly smart. So how do we identify who really is at the forefront, or who do we believe is at the forefront of coming up with a viable solution that, again, they can bring to market and commercialize? So there's a lot of noise to sort through. There's a lot of when we're looking at a lot of these things, we do have to understand the fundamental technology at play there. So we may have to work with other very smart people to go deeper and understand the science behind what's happening. But I would say the biggest challenge is just sorting through that noise.
I think one thing that I've experienced time and time again for investing in deep tech is, yes, the regulatory challenges and whatnot, but one thing that has been the biggest deficit is in actually the experience of the founders. If you go across a person who has amazing kind of backgrounds in engineering, machine learning and all that stuff, it ends up being a much more relatively younger person, the person that has not actually been through the rigmaroles of building out a business, having his cluster go down in the middle of him having, watching the Avengers Endgame, and it's like, what the hell is this on Slack? Nobody laughs. Okay, never mind. So, but these things definitely, the experience deficit has been the hardest for me to understand and deal with, because this also goes back to what kind of business they want to build, what kind of roadmap they're trying to build out to actually come to an offering that, as you say, enterprise will accept and society will accept.
Some of it, because we have everything from fintech to fish tech, we see adoption sometimes being an issue, especially people here still don't think we can build world-class tech in Singapore. And that's actually a challenge, and I want to defy everybody who thinks that way, because we are in a place where the government has built an amazing infrastructure. We attract world-class talent. We've got 27 nationalities, people from Barbados to Bombay to Brisbane in our ecosystem. This is world-class talent that we've got here, and they are building world-class product. But there are local customers who will say, gosh, you've got really good tech, but if only you were from Israel. And then we sit back and we're like, are you kidding me? And we build this tech. We can build this tech for $2 million, $3 million, where in the valley, it'll take you $10 to $20 to build the same thing. So there is a bit of an educational process, even within the local, for the people who are adopting the technology or the other product. So that's one of the, and then the other one is funding, potentially, because some of our companies that have gone beyond Series A into B, looking at $10 to $15 million checks in deep tech, there's still a lack of investors in that space.
So we have Hsien-Hui representing the Singaporean government here, but my questions.
Can't do that.
but my question for Charlz and perhaps Saemin is that, do you think that it's important because Singapore aside, the rest of the markets in Southeast Asia, or even in a bigger perspective, it would be Asia, is it important for the government to actually take the lead to spur things up in the ecosystem?
Sure. I think, well, first of all, as was mentioned, we are incredibly lucky in Singapore because the government has been building this over many decades. Although deep tech is a buzzword now, this has been coming together over a long time. I think Singapore recognized decades ago that, it's 20 kilometers by 40 or whatever it is. It's very small, no natural resources, no agriculture. They achieved what they could in finance and shipping, et cetera. So what was going to drive the next major wave of growth? And I think they've done an incredible job building out that ecosystem. That takes a lot of time. If you're going to build the research institutions and attract and train the best talent, build the right regulatory environment, and then hopefully, build the right space for investors to come and play in that pool as well, that takes a lot of time. So these days, Singapore actually has a big head start compared to a lot of other places. And you mentioned Israel. Israel's got a strong deep tech talent because of the nature of, a lot of them come from military backgrounds, there's a strong engineering background there. But Singapore really is, I think, at the forefront of that as much as anyone. I'm continually impressed by what I see coming out of Singapore. Of course, it's going to take time still. I think people have to understand that these businesses, amazing businesses we see today, they're not going to be instant. If you look at how Gojek grew or something like that, things are going to take time in this space. So people have to accept that, and investors have to view deep tech with different lenses. Going on to the rest of the region, I think governments, they do need to play a part in it. But again, it's the world has done two things. It's opened up and unraveled very quickly over the last few decades, and a lot of them are already on the back foot in that area. So you do have a responsibility to try and build out the ecosystem, but it's not going to be easy.
Sorry. Maybe I'll just jump in to sort of add to what Charlz did. I think my fellow panelists are doing a great job in selling Singapore, so I don't think I need to do more than that. But I think probably just to elaborate, the Singapore government does recognize the need to build a more vibrant ecosystem in deep tech. They recognize that without doing this, it is going to be very difficult for the individual companies to be able to grow, and even for the ministries themselves to review the regulations that govern the managing of such deep tech companies coming up. So I think the government as a whole, SGInnovate in specific, for specific areas like AI, autonomous vehicles, that is something that we're always seeking to do, bringing stakeholders together. One of the statistics my colleagues were giving me was that we ran 300 sessions last year on a variety of topics from AI to blockchain. But the sole purpose of that is really to bring people together, the regulators, corporates, startups, researchers, everyone together so that they understand each other and perhaps do a better job in terms of how to move the technology forward.
Saemin.
I mean, I think it's really hard for other Southeast Asia countries to get to the sophistication of how the Singapore government does governmental relationships. It's a really well-oiled industrial complex machine. But I think that any start that any government can make outside of Singapore will really help retain talent from those countries to stay there and to develop a better outset in terms of how they want to build out that part of the ecosystem, that part of the economy. I make an example where if you look at a country like Thailand, Thailand has a perfect consumption habits and vectors for itself to push itself into a developed market vector. Yet it doesn't have an Uber in the market that's homegrown. It doesn't have a Grab in the market that's homegrown. That's very telling of what the sustainability in the market is, despite consumption being available there. So I think there's a lot of things that each of the governments can do, and obviously, on the forefront of that, for the need for survival and to be productive, Singapore has been the leader here.
Anyone can just jump right into this to answer this. Grab and Gojek, unicorns of Southeast Asia region, success stories, they have also been setting up their own venture funds, right? And they are also investing into sectors like, of course, beyond ride-hailing, there will be deep tech as well. Do you think investors like yourselves are chasing the same deal as them? Does that increase the competition in the region? So Ling, would you like to go first?
Yeah, because we come in so early stage, actually they are our exit in some, we actually sold one company to Gojek in the Philippines. So for us, we see ourselves as feeding the new unicorns in the region, apart from, and on top of that, of course, the BATs of the world, and other, I've got 3 exits I'm working on this month alone, and it's coming from a variety of MNCs and the unicorns, the newly minted unicorns in Southeast Asia.
Charlz?
Yeah, I think in general, those large or those large scale-ups or companies you mentioned typically look to invest in companies that have a lot of strategic value that they can incorporate straight away. So yeah, they might incorporate with an AI company doing that may have relevance to help them on route optimization or something like that. But generally, I don't feel like we're fighting with them. We're all investors are generally happy to work together. The more smart people we can work with, the better. They add a lot of value in certain areas because also a lot of this technology we can test into their ecosystem. So I don't think it's a fight is the right word. Potentially there'll be times where that may come into the fray, but at the moment I don't feel it.
Look, liquidity, despite the meaning of liquidity, on the finance side is very hard. It's very, very hard to move from one place to another. So if a third party comes in saying that they will provide liquidity to a vertical that they're interested in, that just means that the startups that's smaller have a chance to get stronger and mature on their own. So I always welcome, big venture capital firms or small venture capital firms that are born out of these Grabs and Gojeks of the world to actually do their thing. And there can be never a aspect or dimension in time that these guys are competitors. Just because if you think that way, then you're on the losing side. I simply have to take smaller equity stakes and make better choices in that perspective. And to walk on that thought process, that also means that as a venture capitalist, I just have to be smarter earlier about my plays and also be very cognizant of who the people in the next round are.
I think obviously we view the way it's evolving positively. Grab and Gojek did not start out as deep tech companies, but as they sort of evolved, they realized that that is a necessity for them to maintain their competitiveness versus the Ubers, Didis of the world. So they went on a buying spree, and they are now a viable M&A exit for, as Ling said, some of our portfolio companies, which is great for all of us, I think. But it also reflects, some of the characteristics of our home markets. There's a lot of good about Singapore market, but one of the bad things about it really, and I just have to be very honest, is the fact that our retail investors are very shy of technology companies. So that has led to some of the best Singapore companies having to list overseas. But with Gojek, with Grab coming in, offering exits for such smaller companies, it's starting to sort of light a fire under the deep tech ecosystem here.
If I may just add, it's actually still so early, and that we actually need more and more people coming in. So it's good, number one. And number two, these are smart investors. They use the tech. So it actually shows that, your company being valuable when somebody is there to buy you, somebody credible, like a Gojek or a Grab buying you.
So before I open the floor for questions, I have one question for my panelists. You have met so many companies, you have heard so many pitches. What could be improved on when companies pitch to you? I'm pretty sure there are deep tech startups here, right, who wants to talk to these investors after this. So improv after this, what they said, okay? So Hsien-Hui, go.
We see about 600 companies from all over the world every quarter. And the one thing which I would really like for them to have done a little bit more work on was the competitive landscape. A lot of them look at direct competitors. They don't realize that there are alternatives to what they do. They don't realize that people have options, including just status quo. So if you're in deep tech and you think that you're going to change the world just overnight, and then suddenly your total accessible market is in the billions of dollars, that's a little bit hard for us to believe.
Ling?
Yeah, for us, going back to what I said earlier, being able to articulate the problem that you're trying to solve in a very, in a profound manner that shows that you've got insight. And, because we're a B2B fund, we see a lot of more experienced founders. Experience meaning, 10, 15 years in their domains, and having insight and expertise and being able to see the gaps in those industries that they're serving. That, for us, makes a difference.
Yeah, I think several important points have already been touched on. I guess one other point is, we see a lot of smart, very scientific founders who aren't, as was already mentioned, they're not great at running businesses. They don't appear to have necessarily experience in that area or be well equipped. So I guess knowing where your weaknesses are, building out a team that complements you in that area. One thing that it probably doesn't sound so nice, but is a fact, is the second you start a company and you go to raise money, you're not just a founder anymore. You're in sales for the rest of your career because you're constantly selling your company to us. You're pitching your product. You're pitching to new staff. So you need to be able to, as was mentioned, articulate your story very well. And I guess that's one thing. If there were some great scientific founders who could really explain their story and sell their story well, I think that would help them a great deal.
Yeah, one thing that's really been striking to me where founders and I talk and we just get it is more and more so what Charlz was talking about having the right storytelling capabilities, but also to be able to share that empathy between the founder and the investor. Like, why did you start this? What is it in for you? Where are you going for this, right? It doesn't have to be something that's very deeply philosophical, but in terms of that meaning has to hit on both sides. And I think when it does, it becomes a very, very interesting discussion we can have.
Okay, with that, I will open the floor for questions. Is there any questions from the audience? Yes, gentleman over there. Can someone pass him the mic? No? Okay, you can have mine.
Right, thanks. This is directed for Saemin. Where's the Saemin? Yeah. So I'm from Sinarmas, and I'm from one of the innovation units and venture and family office style stuff, right? So I think as a CVC that's very established for yourself, from a conglomerate point of view, right, with Rakuten and Sinarmas, when we negotiate with startups on deals, especially for early stage, we tend to say like, okay, you know what, we bring so much contribution in kind value to you, our ecosystem. And it comes to a point whereby, how do you juggle this contribution in kind versus cash thing and value add to juggle this negotiation with the startup founder? Like, what is considered as we are predatory as a CVC because we have so much contribution in kind, just not going to give you cash, you have to use my assets in order to access, like say, the Indonesian market. How do you deal with this?
If you talk like that, you're predatory. So that's one thing. But number two is that when I deal with startups and I deal with valuations and all that stuff, it's really about brass tacks. What is the market telling me? What is the valuation multiple? What is the book to sale value of that company? The value that I will bring onto that company later on is a completely separate discussion. You as a venture capital investor should be incentivized to get the company at the best cost, but at the same time, there should be no auspices strongly given to the startup that you're going to add so much value, because we know historically and heuristically, every single corporation that talks about that doesn't really deliver, right?
Yes, I entirely agree.
Yeah.
So how do you engage in this conversation? I mean, like, because I'm not a Vijaya, I'm not a family member, right? How do we deal such information as investment managers? I used to come from Vertex, so it's like, how do we say all this to,
I don't know. I literally told my CFO to fuck off and fire me if I don't do well. So
okay.
That's been 6 years. So thank God I'm not fired yet. But that's the thing, right? If you're really serious about it, your career as an investor, you have to take a stand, right? Judge me on a singular output, and if there's anything else you need from me, I'll help you to the best of my advantage. But my goal point here is, yes, strategic, but also how do I give you a capital gains kick? How do I give you these benefits that could be value multiplying and force multiplying?
Okay, thank you. Thanks so much.
Is there any other questions from the floor? No? No? 5, 4? Okay. Gentleman in the front.
This is directed to all of you. Firstly, thank you for some very good and for some very helpful insights. I've come to Singapore to set up a startup business, and for me it was very important to start on the basis that customers don't buy products, they buy solutions to their problems, and they buy people. So I've spent arguably to some a disproportionate amount of time talking to my customers and understanding what their problems are and listening to them and trying to put that together with empirically what the data tells me. I guess my question to you is what is enough in terms of customer input? So as an example, I've talked to 180 plus of my potential customers. To me, that's given me a lot of insight in terms of next steps and how I use some of the empirical data that I collected before. But in the scheme of things, 100, 200, is that enough?
What is enough is when they start to buy. When the checkbook is out, that is when, and the thing is, when a customer adoption, people always say in B2B, it takes forever. It is true, but if you're really, and as I said, we've got like 110 companies. We can see the ones where if you're selling to FedEx, there's a logistics guy selling to FedEx, there's a payments guy selling to FedEx, but we can see when that solution really is solving a problem. FedEx buys the product within a month. The guy who keeps coming back to us saying like, it really takes a long time, because we can see it's the same, it's still an enterprise decision-making cycle, but if you're really solving a problem, there will be adoption.
I hope that answers your questions. I'm just gonna plug in my question right here. It would be great if all the panelists could share what are some of the emerging trends that you are keeping an eye out for the next, say, 12 to 18 months in Asia or Southeast Asia. Saemin, would you like to go first?
Not necessarily Southeast Asia, but what's happening in deep tech right now, one thing that's a little bit worrying is a lot of the artificial intelligence that's developed and what we're developing right now, one is developed on the basis that there are no bad actors. But the issue in reality is that there are bad actors. So in that perspective, I'm keeping an eye out for what these gray actors actually do, and when they exploit systems that have immense financial impact on organizations and faculties. In the relationship of if you're trying to utilize machine learning algorithms to judge your insurance premiums across 500,000 insurance bases, and somebody poison well attacks you with an adversarial network, and you start to classify people on the wrong spectrum. People who are supposed to be charged the right premium are not charged nothing, and vice versa. These are immense problems that are going to come very quickly once you have these actors. I guess you can call them like AI hackers come up and actually try to exploit those systems. So one thing that I'm looking at is that field of how do you prevent the bad actors from coming in and really causing negative impact on companies.
Charlz?
Yeah, a couple areas that we've been, looking at all areas, but one area of particular interest that we recently invested into is in the material science space. Obviously, it's a very hot topic at the moment around single-use plastics. It's a very noisy environment. The whole world knows that basically, if you think about it, in the age of social media, we've all seen the whale cut open and plastic spill out. We've all seen the plastic in the ocean, so the whole world's talking about it. We've always known plastic's bad. Now people are putting pushback. When you put pushback, governments have to react. So if you think about Starbucks sell 4 billion coffee cups a year, paper coffee cups. Each one of those 4 billion coffee cups is coated in polyethylene. Polyethylene is an oil-based derivative, which means those coffee cups have to be either recycled or go to a compost. They're not naturally biodegradable. So this is a very clear problem. The EU has a clear trend to ban single-use plastics. A very noisy space, so hard to navigate through. So we've recently invested into a company that's producing polyhydroxyalkanodes, so PHA, in this space. And PHA, again, has been around for a long time, but the uniqueness in what they've done is a process innovation. They're able to compete on par with plastic, so we like this space. Other areas that are of interest, I like them, we're going digital, but humans still have to eat food. So agri-tech, it's going to happen. If you look at the efficiency improvements we'll bring to farming techniques, that's interesting. And of course, every other buzzword that exists is a buzzword for a reason, because generally there's some value in what those technologies are trying to achieve.
We're quite agnostic as long as it's good. So, this region has 95% of the businesses in the SME space, and that's a sector that's been so underserved for so long. And deep tech can allow people to leapfrog from manual processes to something that is really quite efficient and makes a difference. And going back to what Charlz was saying, certainly precision agriculture, food tech, those are areas that we like.
So I get to lead off with the last. I think I reflect what my fellow panelists have said. The areas that we are interested in reflect the global economic climate, as well as the realities of climate change. We are looking at 5G. We're looking at opportunities in a world which is becoming polarized in terms of technology. We are looking at areas like brain-computer interfaces, where sensors have become more sophisticated, and these become viable investment opportunities. And of course, agri-tech, because if you have got climate change and your crop yields drop, something has got to be done, because this is really right at the lowest level of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Thanks.
As a writer that covers Southeast Asia, I truly hope that the rest of the Southeast Asia market or my home market rather, Malaysia, could eventually catch up to Singapore. Please join me and thank my panelists, and thank you for staying and supporting us. Thank you.
Thank you.